pre-med, and which means, studying books, and, it's a lot of work and anxiety because you really want to be a dentist. If you don't want to be a dentist, why do you want to know about the other stuff? You're not going to do all the austerities if you don't even want to be a dentist. Why tell somebody about the rules unless they first want to be Krishna conscious? I mean, I'm not saying you can never mention them. It's not like it's taboo. But the point is, so the first thing is, Prabhupada wrote me when I first took sannyas from the college, said, don't talk about the rules. This is the most sublime philosophy. And the second thing is, we can talk about the rules, but intelligently. Not as rules, but as an enlightened lifestyle. There are very good reasons, ethical and health reasons, to be vegetarian. Gambling, it's a no-brainer. Intoxication. So if we present the principle, we do present it as just something which an enlightened person would do because it objectively, scientifically leads to a better life. So I'm not trying to get people to give up things. I'm trying to get them to accept Krishna. Because when you grow, you outgrow. I mean, your parents don't rip your toys out of your hands when you're a kid. They just feed you. And they love you. You grow up and you just lose interest in your toys. We're not trying to get people to give anything up. We're trying to get them to appreciate Krishna, to grow spiritually. If they grow, they'll automatically outgrow the other stuff. So somehow, there's all these devotees that just create this high wall of separation between us and the world. And the way I put it, as Prabhupada said, is the world is a headless body, and ISKCON is a disembodied head.
So that image of the high wall, is that just based on the external, like the way we dress, or is it based on...
It's all of that.
Is it based on our... like it says...
all of the above.
Well, it says people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care.
Yeah.
So that wall, is it something we're creating by our own mentality, or is it, the externals,
I think the externals are...
How much of the externals...
I think the externals are just a manifestation of wrong-headedness. I think it's all mythological. The devotees think... frankly, I don't think Krishna's holy name is one bit more powerful when chanted by someone wearing Indian village dress.
But does it work? Does it cut both ways, though?
Yes, because look at one time, they published all the just unedited raw footage of Prabhupada, video. I call it Prabhupada C-SPAN. So there's this very interesting exchange between Prabhupada and this young lady reporter.
I think another one too.
Who was a friend in Philadelphia Rath Yatra. She was a friend of the devotees.
I was there.
Yes, she wasn't an enemy, she was a friend of the devotees. And she asked Prabhupada a question, and often there was a communication thing, Prabhupada Americans, but, they didn't understand what Prabhupada was saying, he didn't quite get what they were saying, and so Prabhupada didn't really answer the question, they kind of moved on to something else. But I really lit up, I understood it. And she asked Prabhupada, do you think, Prabhupada, that because your disciples go out every day, the way they are, and the public is really against them, which is true even back then, that is going to affect your disciples psychologically? And Prabhupada just moved on. He didn't really deal with the question. But I think she really hit on something. Because there's a whole area of social science, which is the psychology of oppressed people, the psychology of oppressed minorities, right? It's a whole area of social science. Mm-hmm. And how people who are in a society where they're not respected, where they're ridiculed, and the psychological mechanisms by which they deal with that. Mm. And so, for example, this is human psychology. If you live in a society where people think you're ridiculous or laugh at you, put you down. Like, for example, if you walk around in a dhoti in the Western world. There's political correctness, they respect your right, but actually, a lot of people think we're crazy. That's just this. Even in Gainesville, where they have that super prasadam program, I taught at the University of Florida. And what I found is lots of people in Gainesville think we're crazy at the university. So when you live in a society where a lot of people think you're crazy or look down on you or laugh at you, you develop psychological mechanisms to deal with that. And so what we've done is, just as people sort of depersonalized us, we have depersonalized them. And so just as the world doesn't care about us, we don't care about them. We go out on Harinam. We couldn't care less what they think. I mean, you see on YouTube, you can see it 100 times on YouTube, this parallel universe event. Where the devotees are doing Harinam, it's say in some European capital or some in America, the people are walking by, they're kind of like, what's that? Maybe one, I don't know, kind of like, hippie type girls dancing or one drunk guy. But basically people are walking by, and the devotees, in the face of this, basically this disinterest of the public, devotees are jubilant, they're triumphant. And you see in their faces, language, that they're absolutely convinced they're winning, they're saving the world, the Yuga Dharma, and no one's stopping. I went to the website of one major North American temple, and just to check, to spy on the Hare Krishna movement. And they had this one link, this headline that said, Best Harinam of the Year. So I clicked on it. And it was an outdoor sort of world culture fair in a major North American city. And they had a very famous kirtan leader. I won't mention his name, but really nice devotee. I mean, he's a really nice guy. He's a very famous kirtan leader. And he was sitting there, harmonially leading the kirtan. And it was a long thing, like 15 or 20 minute clip. And I kept kind of like, 3 minutes, 6 minutes, 11 minutes. And what I found was that the farther I advanced in this video, the less people there were. So at first it was kind of a little curiosity, a bunch of people in a circle, then it just less. Until finally there were very few people. In other words, it wasn't attracting the world, and yet, headline on the ISKCON website, Best Harinam of the Year. When I was teaching at the University of Florida, for some reason, all literally the most famous kirtaniyas in ISKCON. I mean, the A-list. For some reason, they all came to Gainesville for some event or Alachua, and they all went to the Plaza of the Americas, the famous plaza at the University of Florida, and they all spread out the rugs. And they did this kirtan. This is like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and Janis Joplin all playing together or something. Yeah. And so they had. Yeah, so they were all together, and what I found interesting is no one stopped. No one stopped. So we live in this parallel universe. You can see it on hundreds of YouTube clips. Devotees triumphant, leaping in jubilation at the victory of the Sankirtan movement, and no one interested. I once went on Harinam, I don't know if maybe you're with me, at Little 5 Points here. And I was for an hour, not one person, I'm not going to say stop, not one person even turned their head to look at us in an hour. We're just like, so what I'm saying is, can we please be rational? I mean, why don't we just figure out what works and do things that work? We live in our own little bliss bubble, full of all kinds of ideas about Vedic culture and the way I'm dressed and this and that and Agyata Sukri. It's just like, we're just on another planet.
So how do you put all the pieces together? I'm still trying to kind of put it all in my mind. Like, in other words, some things work. Like the example that you just gave, I remember that kirtan you talked about. But there are other kirtans.
Okay, there are, but
well,
frankly...
just in general, like there are other ones when people do look, they do participate.
I know, but even when they do, they don't come. See, there's two kinds of attention, and we don't make that distinction. Okay. One kind of attention is good show. You know, if
That one, okay, that one.
yeah,
Let's get on that one.
yeah, if you go to Cirque du Soleil, for example, it's expensive.
Yeah.
Pay $100. If you go to Cirque du Soleil, let's say a guy brings his wife, maybe a couple kids, buy some, souvenirs, refreshments, you can pay $1,000. It's not cheap. But, so obviously people, the people they throng, they pay money. Simple question is, how many of them want to join the circus? The super duper, off the charts Festival of India is one in Poland. And yet they can only put that on with foreign devotees because they don't make Polish devotees. So there's two kinds of attention. There's good show, entertaining, exotic. I mean, frankly, you could do Festival of Polynesia, Festival of, Central Africa, Festival of the North Pole, Festival of this and that. You get people would come, and they'd be interested, and they'd applaud. Wow, that's really interesting. Thanks, really appreciate it. Here's some. But no one wants to become an Eskimo. No one, people aren't, moving to all these to Polynesia. So we don't realize that what we want is not the attention for just some nice exotic show. The attention we want is where people look at us and say, I identify with this. This could be my life. Now, if you go out on the street dressed exotically, how many people are going to think, maybe I could dress like that and go out on the street?
Mm-hmm.
Very, very few. Almost none. So I want to go out there in a way that people can identify with me and think, hey, I'd like to do this. Maybe this could be my life. Not, hey, that was a good show. Because people don't join the circus. And we don't even have those categories in ISKCON. We don't even have those categories.
So is there even a scope? Like the discussion that we're having right now, this is wonderful, nice group of devotees. But amongst the decision makers, the leaders, the boat turners, I mean, is there?
I think.
In your mind, is there a scope for that? Because I would love to be part of making
my
that
honest
happen.
opinion, I think that, like your generation, the two ladies here, and you, even though you're not a lady, I'll still include you. But I think, all of you, I think, like when I went to Europe, I found that the younger generation, temple presidents, regional secretaries, even sannyasis, totally get it, love it. The leaders above them, I honestly don't have much hope. I think they may be the last to understand.
But if you're having so much of positive feedback,
Yeah.
from, like you say, our generation and temple presidents and national secretaries and so on, why don't you get a poll from everyone and say, this is
It's a good idea. It's a good idea. Actually, it's a good idea. Because also there's a lot of intimidation in ISKCON.
we should be focusing on what's going to work, because we've tried for 20 or 30 years
40.
and those things are not working.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's a good point. It's a very good point. We should do something like that. I know there's a lot of people in that generation who, say temple presidents, who agree with me and who express it openly, but they're threatened by the leaders. They're threatened.
Also, maybe they're afraid because they can't voice their opinions independently. They have
what?
to have backup. They can't voice their opinions independently. They have to have backup.
No, it's true. You're right. Of course you're right. But that's what happens. They're threatened. Or they're intimidated. Because even if, your points are well taken. It's, what I found as I traveled around, for example, Europe, is that I would tell the devotees, Prabhupada quotes, and they were like shocked. What? Prabhupada did that?
Yeah.
I was. few that you.
Yeah, and I've got pages of them. The real Prabhupada.
So why has that been hidden from us?
Okay. If you study the history of religions, new religions, let's say, like you study the first 2 generations of the Jesus movement, or Buddhism, or ISKCON, there's a very strong tendency, which you see almost always. You certainly see it. Christianity very strongly. And you see it in the Buddhism movement. You know, when it first started, and you see it in ISKCON, a tendency that when the charismatic leader passes on, to mythologize in a certain way, which doesn't necessarily reflect who he was. And one of the reasons is that if you think about it, you know, Prabhupada always, here's an explanation of it. Prabhupada always talked about Vani and Vapu, you know, that serve the message, not just the external form of the guru. And of course, that made perfect sense to me, and that's the relationship I have with Prabhupada. I mean, I spent a lot of time with him, but also I was really happy to go out and do things for him. The fact is that a lot of devotees aren't on that platform. For example, when Prabhupada was here, he used to complain all the time that his own disciples weren't reading his books.
Right.
I mean, how many people read serious theology books? And so I remember Prabhupada so many times in class, one time he was in LA in 72, and he was kind of like saying sarcastically, well, when you're selling books, if people ask you, do you read the book? You can just tell them, no, sir, I don't read them, I just sell them. So, but the fact that, you know, so many devotees didn't read Prabhupada's books, what does that show? It shows that their relationship with Prabhupada was not intellectual or theological. You know what I mean? It was kind of like Prabhupada. And another evidence that so many devotees are not so strong is that when Prabhupada left, how many Prabhupada disciples really remained active? I mean, we all went through, I mean, of course there was momentum, like in the first couple of years most people were active, but you know, we all went through problems, you know, there were problems as in any religious institution. But then what you have is, you know, most of them kind of MIA, you know, missing in action. Isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, what percentage of living Prabhupada disciples, the ones that didn't, you know, kill themselves with Mahaprasadam, what percentage of living Prabhupada disciples are actively preaching?
Very low.
Yeah. But now let's take it back to your question. If it's the case, as I've tried to show, that most devotees are not on that sort of higher spiritual plane where they really understand Prabhupada, not just as an external body performing cute anecdotes, but as a great teacher, as you know, as a spiritual figure that we're connected to beyond time and space. If you understand that, then you're just attached to the real Prabhupada. But if, as probably the case with most of them, from what we see from history, if it's the case that you know a lot of Prabhupada disciples, perhaps most, were really attached to his personal form, and that's why you go to so many like Prabhupada disappearance days or Vyas Pujas, and you hear anecdotes, and you know, not philosophy, not get out there and save the world, but more the anecdotes, which is the sign. When someone gets up there and just tells anecdotes, I mean, you know, we all love the anecdotes, but when someone basically is just giving the anecdotes, the Prabhupada stories, it means that's their level of connection to Prabhupada. Now, given all of that, what happens when that form, which was really the foundation of your faith and everything, is gone? It's gone. And so you're left behind, you know, in this world, and Prabhupada's not here. Again, if you don't primarily connect to Prabhupada on that philosophical level, or on, you know, beyond time and space, spiritual level, not the body, then when Prabhupada's gone, you are in trouble. And so what you find is, in world religions, including ISKCON, that when the great charismatic leader passes away, to compensate for the loss, that extraordinary loss, to compensate for it, you have to begin to build up who that person was, and then people start to mythologize him. And so as you begin to exaggerate and mythologize that figure, it compensates for the loss of that physical presence. And so, although Prabhupada, if you look at him, especially at the time in ISKCON when he knew all the devotees, and they knew him, and there's a give and take on practical details. And Prabhupada always said it was absurd, to say that pure devotee knows everything or is, infallible, in material things. And yet, you get this mythologized Prabhupada, where Prabhupada once said that, we should, do this or some practical external thing, and that's like in Vedic conjunction. And then when you suppress Prabhupada's statements to the contrary, then you get this mythological figure. So it's like for example, somehow Krishna empowered me to do this service with other good devotees to finish Prabhupada's Bhagavatam. And so I know that there are many leaders even, and Prabhupada's disciples, devotees, who think it would be offensive in their country to publish the 11th and 12th cantos, the rest of the 10th canto. They think it's offensive to Prabhupada.
Like in former Yugoslavia, we don't have translated 11th and 12th canto. I think that's the...
Exactly. It's the Bhagavatam. It's the Bhagavatam. And all the commentaries we did are based on the Acharyas. But you show respect to Prabhupada by denigrating everyone else.
I just finished reading it.
Yeah. So, but again, you see in ISKCON, the leaders, they when you start to look at things sociologically, historically, psychologically, rather than just theologically, or like for some, the Maha Mantra is the GBC shall be the ultimate managing authority of ISKCON. And even, what that means. What did Prabhupada actually mean by that? What did he mean by ultimate managing authority? Because you see, if you look at the GBC, and I'm not against the GBC system. In fact, I'm trying to strengthen the GBC system by bringing it more into line with Prabhupada's actual teachings. So I'm not trying to subvert the GBC, I'm trying to strengthen it. But the fact is that you see the GBC tends to coalesce two things as if they're only one thing. And here's the conceptual problem. We actually have two separate ideas, you could say. One is, clearly Prabhupada said in his last will and testament that GBC shall be the ultimate managing authority for ISKCON, the entire ISKCON. That's a fact. We know that Prabhupada said that. Now, the second thing, which is different, is how the GBC interprets that mandate. Now, the GBC has tended to believe themselves that there is absolutely no difference between their interpretation of that mandate and the mandate itself. So that everything they do is fully authorized by Prabhupada's statement. But here are the facts. It's like, for example, people that have spent their whole life in one village, they don't know the world. They just think the way we do things, that's just life. That's the way people do things. And if some people do things differently, they're a little off-center. In fact, there's a word for it. If you only know your own province, it's called provincial. And so, if, however, you've traveled and lived in different cultures, then when you come back to your country, you realize, well, that's just the way we do it. And there are other ways to do it. And so, with the GBC, see, it's a very interesting thing. In ISKCON, political is a dirty word. That's political, Prabhu. So, but actually, if you look up the word political in the dictionary, you find it has a positive or neutral sense, which Prabhupada didn't use, and it has a negative sense that Prabhupada did use. So political can have a negative sense, meaning, sort of pursuing your own selfish interests in the name of serving or something, trying to get power for yourself or whatever, political. But that's not the primary meaning of political. The primary meaning, which Prabhupada didn't use, is just something related to government or the exercise of power. Now in ISKCON there is power because it's a hierarchy. Someone's in charge and someone's not in charge. So whenever you get a group of human beings, there's power. Whether that power is exercised by the group, by an individual, by one person, which is monarchy, or a small group, which is oligarchy, or or whatever it is, there's power and it's exercised. And therefore there is a political dimension to ISKCON, not in the sense of people, trying to grab power, but just there's power in ISKCON. There are groups of people. Someone gives orders, someone follows orders, someone makes the rules, other people have to follow the rules. Power is exercised in ISKCON, and therefore there's a political dimension in ISKCON. It's just a fact. Now, there are different political philosophies. And Prabhupada did not, he gave us certain indications of the political philosophy he wanted, but he never systematically spelled it out. But if we take Prabhupada's different indications and put them all together, we can begin to discern Prabhupada's political philosophy. In other words, how Prabhupada thought power is to be exercised in ISKCON. And if we look at the GBC's interpretation of how power is to be exercised, they're not identical. And I'll give you one example of that, which is the main example. And that is, here are two models. One model is the totalitarian model, which is basically the government just controls everything. And they may choose to give you discretionary power in some area, or they may intervene. But basically, in all aspects of life, the government ultimately has power. Now, that's the model the GBC, up to this point, has embraced. Which means that, let's say you as a devotee, you would say you have your private life. You have your family, or you may have a job, or whatever you do. Obviously, that's your business. So not totalitarian in that sense. But the extent to which you work in ISKCON, in official ISKCON projects, the GBC can just hire you, fire you, tell you we like this, we don't like that, and that's the way it is. So the extent to which you are involved in official ISKCON projects, they have something like a totalitarian control over you. Now, here's the other model, which is the one Prabhupada actually wanted, and which he said he wanted. And that is, it's the model of let's say, a first world free society, where there are laws, and by definition, any law restricts individual freedom. Because as soon as I tell you, you must do this, or you cannot do that, or you can do this, it's restricting your freedom. Now, in free societies, people accept certain restrictions on their freedom because they agree that it's for the common good and it's ultimately for their good and so on. But if you follow these basic rules, you're a free citizen. You can do whatever you want. If you follow the law, you can do whatever you want. That was Prabhupada's model. In other words, let's say you're working here in Atlanta or somewhere else in the world, anywhere else in the world. If there are the laws have to be reasonable. They cannot be unjustifiable impositions or restrictions of individual freedom. But if there are reasonable rules and you follow reasonable rules, they have no right to tell you anything. You can do things the way you want. So, for example, if Prabhupada said that you don't have to wear dhotis or saris, and he said it many times, then in a Hare Krishna temple, the GBC has no right to tell the devotees that they have to do this or can't do that, because within Prabhupada's statements and teachings, they're adults and they can do what they want if they follow the rules. And the rules have to coincide with Prabhupada's teachings. Now, deity worship is a special area. I won't go into it because people go crazy over that. As far as, let's say, could you dress differently in deity worship? I would say philosophically yes, politically no. But in any case, that model, and I proved that in the paper I wrote. I mean, I should send you the paper I wrote. I give evidence from ISKCON law. It's all based on the GBC's own words in ISKCON law. It's all based on that, and I think I show, in fact, no GBC has even challenged my conclusions because there really is no counter evidence. So what I'm saying is, in a nutshell, ISKCON, Prabhupada wanted us, and he said it, Prabhupada wanted ISKCON to be a constitutional society where you are not subject to the whims of individual leaders, but you follow, like they do, fair laws. And if you follow the law, ISKCON's not a police state, it's not a GBC police state. If you are mistreated by a GBC, you have a right for justice. They have no right to deny you fair process. They have no right to deny you justice. They have no right to unjustifiably interfere in your life. And so, I mean, all these principles, I explain all this in the paper. And so therefore I'm saying is that there are many political philosophies. So when you say someone's the ultimate managing authority, what does that mean? You know, what are the limits of their power? What can they do or not do? The GBC is not even aware that they have a political philosophy. It's like, for example, let's say psychology. Even if you don't study psychology, you have one. And so people that have never studied psychology think I'm just normal. And when you start to study psychology, you begin to realize that, well, you've got a very specific psychology. So the GBC, having never studied political philosophy, they don't even know they have one. And it's actually, so the way the GBC operates in ISKCON is Prabhupada's mandate. It's based on their interpretation of Prabhupada's mandate. I mean, the mandate has an objective side. I mean, to be the ultimate managing authority is what it says. So it's not that everything can be, interpreted away. So we know they're the ultimate managers. But what does that mean? What are the limits of their power? What can they do? What can they not do? What must they do? They've never thought about it. They've actually never thought about it. It's just like, how do you save Prabhupada's Western mission? They don't think about it. So, okay, you can do a survey. I'll hire you. Anyway, I guess we all have other things to do, but again, I'm a loyal member of ISKCON. I was GBC for 30 years. I was chairman of the GBC. I support the GBC system, but there is something called the pendulum effect, which is a scientific principle. And so what you find is, see, the problem in ISKCON is that everyone has always been afraid of people not accepting the GBC, which is a rational fear, because we have the example of the Gaudiya month. So it's a rational fear. But on any road, you can go off the road on either side, not just one side. And so there are actually two threats, two dangers to Prabhupada's GBC system. One is the GBC having too little authority, and the other, the GBC having too much. Because as Plato pointed out, and every political philosopher since Plato, one political extreme by the pendulum effect leads to its opposite. So tyranny leads to anarchy or democracy. And by the GBC assuming too much power, denying fair process to other devotees, acting above the law instead of following ISKCON law, they are actually subverting the GBC system. So the GBC system can be ruined from inside by taking it to an unjustified extreme of power. Tyranny threatens the GBC as much as not following GBC. And that's never been recognized. And as I told my good buddy, the Buddy Acharya, the Bhattacharya.
Buddy Acharya, I like that.
Yeah, Lural Buddy Acharya. I mean, having been myself a cult leader for so many years, I am, Mango Republic dictator. Probably said the mango's king of fruits. It wasn't until I had to suffer all this injustice that I finally got it, because You know, if you're a big leader in ISKCON, everything always goes well and you're always on top, you really, scientific studies show that the more you have power, or the more you believe you have power, the less empathy you have. It's scientific. The less empathy you have. And, of course, if you're an advanced devotee, you can compensate for that. But, so when it actually happened to me, it's like the Bob Dylan song, how does it feel? Once upon a time, you dressed so fine, you threw the Prabhus a dime in your
Didn't you?
threw them a rupee in your Prabhu. Yeah, when I was shocked when I started this Krishna West thing and other issues.
Pushback and all this.
Yeah, and I was willing to discuss. I mean, I'm not, there's always room for discussion. We can always learn from each other. So I thought, okay, we'll talk about it. But when I saw that they were just incapable of acting fairly, they could not follow fair process. There are universal principles of fair process, and they simply could not follow them. They just couldn't do it. They could not do it. And time again, they wouldn't say, yeah, we should do it, but they couldn't do it. After my European tour last year, hundreds of devotees were like fired up, wanted to go out and preach, wanted to come back to ISKCON, wanted to come back to Prabhupada. They ignored all that. All they cared about was in Berlin, at the insistence of the local temple president. And my agreement with the GBC was I would follow the local temple presidents. I wore nice clothes, gentlemen, Western clothes, and gave a class in the Berlin temple at the insistence of the local leaders. That's all they cared about. Which is a great offense, obviously, for reason only to them. And so then they were going to have a meeting to discuss me, and I kept telling them over and over again, if you talk about me, talk to me. All I'm saying is, if you're going to accuse me of anything, I have a right to reply. And he rejected it. Actually, when it was brought to their meeting, they did not want me to reply. Even though it goes against universal principles of justice and violates their own GBC rules of fair process. In fact, if you look at the rules of fair process, they violated almost all of them.
Wow.
With impunity, of course. And so, as I was telling the Bhattacharya, that, before this happened to me, you can go your whole life and not realize what you're doing until someone does it to you. And then you understand it. So then I started to write this paper, this GBC, I started to write the paper, and at first I was like angry and I'm going to show them. But then as I wrote it, and I realized the dimensions of the problem, I saw that, wait a second, this is not about me. Never mind me, this is not about me, this is about the devotees. Because if they do this to me, God only knows what they do to regular devotees.
Been there.
Oh my God, I can't believe anyone would mistreat you.
Let's just say I was married to a very powerful man.
Oof. Oh, that can be a problem.
Yeah, within ISKCON and the GDC, so go figure.
Yeah, that's a pretty easy figure. If you give me your email, I can send